Hello friends, I've got a fun book haul today because I'm pretty confident you'll walk out of here with at least one book you've never heard of that you'll add to your TBR. I've got some used books I picked up locally when I was out shopping with my wife, and I also got some massive novels that I want to share with you as well that came in the mail. So let's get to it. First up, to pique your interest, I have not one, but a two-volume, 1,600-page novel from Austrian writer Heimito van Doderer, The Demons. And this is a two-set edition from Wise Blood Books. I think currently they might be the only ones publishing an English translation right now in print. This book kind of goes in and out of print. It's not super widely available, but I know there are used sets I've seen at bookstores, on people's bookstagrams, and across YouTube. So there are other editions out there. But right now, Wise Bloods has this two-volume set, and I think normally it's only 1,300 pages to be fair, which is still a massive book. But I think the reason this is 1,600 pages is because the print on this is actually, it's quite large print that I'm not fully used to. I don't mind it. Probably easier on the eyes. But that's what's making it 1,600 pages. But you guys know I love big books. I was tempted to do that. Love big books and I cannot lie, which I guess I'm leaning into the joke by still expressing it. But I just love a massive novel. Have explained it before. It's not from pomposity. It's not from I'm trying to just seem superior. Like I can understand these massive encyclopedic novels. It's really just the allure of them is very interesting. They usually, because of their extensiveness, their length, they contain so many overlapping and imbricated ideologies and plot lines, and the characters usually are so rich because you've spent so many pages with these characters, hundreds of pages, often months with the same book, that you become tied to it. You know, you feel like your soul or your psyche has become tethered to this piece of work. So with that in mind, and we'll get to another massive novel at the end of this video, but I had to grab your attention while I had it. The Demons. Now, what is The Demons about? With a lot of these books, I get a general gist of the plot, but I also don't want to, one, spoil anything, and two, sometimes these like summaries aren't quite accurate, and sometimes it's accurate, but what you take away from the book is very different from the Wikipedia summary or the Goodreads summary that's provided. But generally, the book follows a whole assortment of characters within this very complex, sprawling depiction of Viennese life. So Vienna, 1910s, 1920s is what is kind of the general setting. But from my understanding, it's a tumescent work that just jumps around with different settings and environments and characters. It sounds like it's very quirky. It sounds like it's a very strangely written work. There is another book from Heimito van Doderer, which I'm sure I'm butchering the name, but there's another work, I think it's the Strudelhof Steps as well, that I think New York Review of Books publishes. So from my understanding, that might be not a direct prequel to The Demons, but somewhat of a prequel. He definitely wrote it before this book, and I think some of the characters, from my understanding, lend or leap into this book as well. Could be wrong, but very interested to read an Austrian writer. I haven't read, if you guys have followed the channel, you know I've read a lot of German philosophy, but not as much German literature or Austrian literature, that kind of Prussian region. So yes, it's going to be a very long and complex and intriguing read that I can't wait to indulge myself in. I'm not sure when I'll read this. I'm in this perpetual debate right now between reading this or the novel I'll get to at the end of this video first. But I think I'm going to try and squeeze both in before the end of the year. We will see how fast I can read or how much time I have to read. But definitely going to crack into this before the end of the year. And again, that's The Demons and from Wise Blood Books. Now we're going to crack into some of these books I got at my local used bookstores. And first up is a writer I've seen his name over and over on the shelves, yet I never leaped at him. I didn't know much about him. I think he's widely read, but not maybe widely discussed, at least as much as other authors, and that is Germinal by Émile Zola. Hopefully pronouncing all of that right, but my first French novelist I believe I'm getting into. Again, I've read a lot of French philosophy, But as far as French novelists, haven't gotten into Proust, haven't gotten into some of these others. So Zola will be my first kind of leap into that sphere. And Zola is a quite interesting character, not only a novelist, a playwright, but also a journalist. He played a pivotal role during the Dreyfus affair and kind of exposing that whole situation. And so he was kind of just in the midst of some chaos and revolution within France. And he emerges out of this tradition of naturalism, or the school of naturalism, where he's depicting life in a very predetermined, harsh, again, deterministic way. And this book specifically, I think it's one of his more widely read books. He's written a lot, and I was kind of looking on Goodreads, where should I perhaps start with his works, because there was a few on the shelf when I was looking, and I decided to go with this nice little Penguin Classic edition, in good condition, good price. And this apparently covers, I believe, coal miners within the 1860s within France, and explores some of these themes of exploitation and, again, poverty, compassion, sympathy, hope for humanity, all of that within within the midst of suffering. So I'm interested to see what I think of Zola, because I think he is, as I was again scanning and learning more about him, he has a lot of works. He was a fairly prolific writer, so hopefully I love this and I can dig into some more Zola, but also some more French literature as well. Next up is a book I originally grabbed off the shelf weeks ago, and then got to the counter and then decided to put it back because the price, there was two prices in the book and I thought it was cheaper than it was. But then weeks later, it kind of stuck in my mind, and I was like, damn it, I think I really want that book anyway. And fortunately, because it's a less read Russian writer, it was fortunately still there, and that is The Gentleman from San Francisco, and other short stories by Ivan Bunin. Ivan Bunin is a late 19th century into 20th century Russian writer, I believe. Much more known for his, I think, poetry and short stories, from my understanding. But I haven't been able to see, there's a couple Russian writers, whether they're poets or playwrights, novelists, that I've been recommended either from you all or from a lot of the Russian natives that I've been practicing my own experience learning Russian with. And of course, we'll talk about literature, and I'll express a number of books that I've read from Russian literature, and they'll give me great recommendations. One of them is Bunin, and it's hard to find that many editions. I'm sure there are some Penguin editions or some copies you can get on Amazon, but I really try to let my used bookstores kind of dictate not necessarily what I read, but how soon I buy something. So I've been looking and looking, couldn't really find Bunin, but I did find this nice hardcover edition. I'm not even sure of the publisher. It's definitely an old copy here. Neat little design. Like I said, it's got a nice dust jacket to it. And so this has the Gentleman from San Francisco, which is a fairly popular story from him, but it's also got a bunch of others. I would list them, but there's a lot of them, and there's none that really stand out to me, at least as far as the title is. So I'm not sure if I'll read all of them in a row, or whether I'll kind of nitpick with these stories. But Bunin is someone I don't hear that much about within Russian literature, but I want to get my feet wet beyond some of these big names. And again, this book was just calling my name, so had to pick it up. Next up is a book most of you have either heard of, read, or at least have heard of the movie it inspired, and that is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. Philip K. Dick is a sci-fi writer, quite prolific sci-fi writer, that I've been meaning to, again, get my toes wet with and start to read more sci-fi, read even a little bit more fantasy, just expand beyond literary fiction a bit. And I read some Ursula K. Le Guin recently, which coincidentally, they went to school together. They graduated from the same class, but apparently they were never really in touch or close. But I think that's quite interesting that Philip K. Dick and Ursula K. Le Guin graduated not only from the same high school, but within the same class. Side note, but back to the book itself, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. I've been waiting and waiting for a used copy, primarily because a lot of the new editions of this just call it Blade Runner, which is fine, but I'm just a stickler and I like used books. The book itself, post-apocalyptic world where there's very few animals or endangered species left, and I think you have kind of two diverging plots. You have one character seeking out these android type of animals that have escaped and trying to, again, corral them or bring them back. And then you have another character, from my understanding, that is trying to assist them in evading this person who's trying to pursue and grab them. And you have these different apocalyptic themes going on of individual versus collectivism, of post-nuclear war situation, of reality versus artificial reality. A lot of this, again, emerging in an era of the Cold War and rapid technological advances of the time. I believe this was written late 1960s. So interesting theme and a pretty short book. So with all these new authors I try and pick up, you don't want to base your decision off one book, but I thought, hey, this is a good place to start, and I want to see if I like Philip K. Dick's work, I'll definitely read more. It's a pretty short read, and yeah, so a nice little sci-fi short read I'm probably going to dig into soon. Next up is also a book that was adapted to a very famous movie, and that is Doderer Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. If you hate my Russification of everything, I apologize, but I'm learning the language, so I'm just going to pronounce it that way. Doderer Zhivago, of course, famously adapted into a movie with Omar Sharif. I haven't seen the movie, but a friend of mine had seen it and mentioned it. I've heard of the book multiple times, and I was again scanning the shelves at the bookstore, as one does, and I saw a nice copy, a Signet Classic. Kind of reminded me of my copy of Oblomov. Normally I don't like these kind of mass market size. They're compact, they're hard to kind of read the words that are close to the inner part of the spine. But this was in decent condition, very cheap price, $3. $3 for a great Russian novel. And so I'm very eager to read it and likely watch the movie after as well. But a few side notes about Doderer Zhivago was, like a lot of Russian works, it faced a lot of censorship, and so it was originally not published and declined, and then it finally did get published, but not in Russia or in Soviet Union, Soviet Russia at the time, and it was continually banned there, and Pasternak actually won the Nobel Prize, but had to decline the prize because he faced so much pressure and condemnation from the internal, essentially government, because a lot of the work centers around individualism, anti-communist values and perspectives, and depicted Soviet society in a very harsh way. The story takes place and covers a lot of Russian historical events, the revolutions and wars and all of that. And so they didn't really want that out there. It honestly astonishes me, a quick side note, it astonishes me how many Russian authors I've talked about on this channel that are published, on my shelf, that faced insane censorship, and yet fortunately their works still prevail today. Whether it's Bulgakov or Pasternak or Yuri Alesha or any of these writers, right? The list goes on and on and on. It's again, I'm thankful. It's quite impressive that they were still able to get the word out. And last funny side note about this book, well, funny but interesting, is the CIA actually bought hundreds of copies of this book to disseminate within Russia. Isn't that strange? The CIA is out here buying this novel, and they had to declassify, I think it was like 99 documents, stating that they did this. So the CIA was in on disseminating this book in Soviet Russia. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, governments are gonna government. Or Central Intelligence is gonna do covert ops, but yeah, just interesting side note. All right, and the last book, and the other massive novel, is The Instructions by Adam Levin. Not to be confused with Maroon 5 singer Adam Levine, but Adam Levine's The Instructions. This is a book that I would have never heard of if it wasn't for Chris at Leaf by Leaf. So huge shout out to Chris at Leaf by Leaf. He runs one of the best booktube, if not the best booktube channel on YouTube. Phenomenal. And he actually not only has a massively long, I think hour-plus video discussing Levin's work, but he also did an interview with him this past spring that I was listening to as well. And it not only gives you good insight into the book and how he was kind of writing it and thinking out these themes and characters and the structure, but you also get a good insight into the author, which I think is very nice to get as well, and see how they kind of bleed, or how they you see them reflected into the work. So it's nice to do that when you have a living author still there to speak about the work. But this is from McSweeney's. This is the Bar Mitzvah edition, actually, because they reached 13 years since this book was published. And before I get to the book itself, how audacious is it to, as a debut novel, publish a 1,000-page book. I just can't imagine the gall you have to submit as your debut novel a 1,000-page book. But here we are. Now, like any 1,000-page book, this might not be for everybody, but for someone like me, it is right up my alley. And especially once I heard comparisons to David Foster Wallace, I was like, okay, I gotta check this thing out. And it's printed in a 2-volume set. Follows this young Jewish student named Gurion Maccabee, who has these kind of messianic tendencies. So he believes he's the Messiah, and he plans to write this kind of New Testament and launch this revolution and kind of rile up some followers, hence the name, The Instructions. And it's a sprawling encyclopedic novel from my understanding, and it has some very experimental, maybe not totally idiosyncratic to this work. It's not like he's the only one doing it. I can't say that for sure, but some interesting and creative or experimental aspects to the book. One that I'll mention is the fact that the book begins with a translator note, and the translation note is a bit of a parody because obviously it was written in English, but the idea is that the book was written in English, translated, I believe, to Hebrew, then translated back from Hebrew to English, because if something is to be the true word of God, or to be, truth in the sense of saying the phrase, the word, right? The word in some kind of absolute, pure abstraction that exists kind of separate from humanity. If it's to be true in a pure sense, then it should be capable of being translated and translated back into being the exact same copy. Of course, we know this won't happen because with any translated work, you're making different kind of choices and judgments to create a translation. When you translate it back, it's again going to be something entirely different. But I think it's a very interesting idea that he has this, instructions or new biblical text that has been translated back and forth and contains this kind of perfection or purity to it. Another example would be, they were referencing this in the interview that Chris did, but that I believe Gurion at some point in the book says, "Don't ever put me in quotes," or "Don't ever quote me." And he's the only character throughout the story that is never with quotes when he's speaking and there's dialogue. So little things like that. That doesn't make it a great book, but it's interesting. It's creative. It again grabs my attention. So 2 fat books here, again totaling I think just over 1,000 pages. Fortunately, there's no 100, 200 pages of footnotes like a David Foster Wallace book, but a very interesting read I think awaits for me. And I've also heard it reads faster than a 1,000-page book. I think I saw that on some Goodreads reviews where they're like, yeah, it is 1,000 pages, but it reads faster. So I think I'm starting this soon. I'm traveling in the next few weeks, so I think I'll wait until I get back because I don't want to be interrupted or having to bring this kind of large copy on a plane. But very excited to start this one. So again, I'm teetering. Do I start the instructions next, or as far as my big novel I'm working on and chewing at, or do I start the demons? Either way, I couldn't be more excited to read them both. So as a quick recap, we have The Instructions by Adam Levin. We have The Demons by Jaimito von Doderer. We have Dr. Zhivago by Pasternak. We have Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. The Gentleman from San Francisco and other short stories from Yvonne Bunin. And Germinal by Emil Zola. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this book haul. And again, the idea is that you walked away from this video with at least one book you can add to your TBR. If you've read them all, I'd be impressed. But let me know in the comment section below, are any of these already on your list? Did you add one? Is there something that I need to add on my list? You guys absolutely kill it with recommendations. I told my wife yesterday that I don't think I've once been recommended a video from you that has been like a generic recommendation, like, oh, read Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, or that you recommend me something I've already read. Almost every time it's something very distinct, unique, eccentric, and that's what I love. I love the spirit you all bring to this channel in these videos. So thank you very much. As always, like the video if you enjoyed it, share it, subscribe for more content like this, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.